Hi, you're watching Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this video we're going to be talking about the brand new Star Wars television show, The Mandalorian. Before I dive deeply into the various pros and cons that I see in this show, let me give you my basic summary overview of where I think things stand now that we're 2 episodes in to the series. First of all, the first episode, I was what you would call cautiously optimistic at the end of that, and I was leaning more to the optimism than to the caution. I thought things were trending in the right direction. It did enough to set up what looked like a very promising show, a promising series. However, episode 2 was released, and now I am more cautious than optimistic. There are things that I am concerned about and have left me sort of scratching my head and wondering whether or not this is actually going to be a good television show now that we've seen episode 2. I'll come back to that in a minute and why there are things and what those specific things are that I'm a little bit concerned about. But first of all, let me just hone in on the positives, because there are some good things that I like about this series, regardless of how I feel a little bit worried now about where things are trending. First of all, I like the musical score. It feels connected to the Star Wars universe, but it's also unique. It has its own uniqueness. It definitely stands out. But I think most importantly of all, it has a strong Western vibe to it, and that's quite important because this television series really is a space Western. It really does take that whole space Western concept and amplify that when you consider who this character is and the fact that he now inhabits a version of the Star Wars world, which is really the Wild West. Order has broken down. I guess he's on this new frontier, and so the score itself really lends itself to that concept, that sort of thematic aspect of the show, and I think it's really well done. And it's memorable. It sort of sticks in your head after the show has finished. I love the end credits, particularly the first half of the end credits. Again, this sort of suits the Western feel quite strongly, where you have those paintings, those still paintings of various key scenes that you have seen in the previous episode. I really like that. The costumes, the effects, what you might call, I guess, the visual world building, I think is really good in the show. It clearly shows that a lot of effort has gone into this aspect of the show. The costumes are really well done. The effects, there's nothing on screen that feels like what you might call typical television effects. The visual effects feel like movie quality, or the sort of stuff that you would expect in a high quality television show. Nothing feels too rushed at this stage. I like things like there's that scene where we see those stormtroopers who are now freelancing for someone else, or presumably they're freelancing for someone else, because it is still possible that these people are connected to the Empire, because I looked at that situation in that room when the Mandalorian walks in there, and based on the various characters in that room, even though we know very little about them, they do have a vibe to them and a look to them like they still are connected to the Imperial machine, or the former Imperial machine, in some way. But the stormtroopers themselves, there's just the uniforms are not shiny, they're not cared for. It's a visual piece of symbolism, and it's an important piece of visual symbolism to show you that order has broken down, that there's chaos. There is not that same stringent concern for the rules and for a controlled and carefully manicured kind of regime and universe like we've had previously. So stuff like that is cool. The action set pieces are good, and they're the sort of action set pieces where they play out like I think an action set piece should. You're not just watching lots of blockbuster action unfolding on the screen. You're invested in what's going on. I think of that, sort of the final stage of that first episode where the Mandalorian jumps on that hover cannon. Apologies, I know that's not the correct term for it. But he jumps onto that cannon and he just swings around and sort of takes out all the bad guys. And it's a great moment of action, but it's also, it's like a climax. The musical score builds up. The way it plays out, you're like, yeah, this is great. The good guys are beating the bad guys, and so it sort of pulls you in. It's not just sort of mindless action, and the action set pieces are well crafted. I really love the nostalgic aspects of this show. You might argue that it's possibly a bit too heavy on the nostalgia at times, but compared to what we've been served up from the Disney Star Wars machine of late, it's kind of a welcome thing, actually. I like the fact that this show actually feels like Star Wars, but at the same time, it's still charting its own new and different direction, or that's in theory what I think is happening, because there are some problems, and this is why I am concerned about this show, and now why after the second episode I am more cautious than optimistic. So what do I see the problems as? First of all, to me it feels like the character development is lacking in this show. There are little snippets of information that we're getting, but it feels like the typical sort of more substantial character development that you would expect in a television show is missing here. I'll talk about in a moment why I think this possibly could be, but basically it feels to me like the character development is not what it could be. We're only getting little snippets, and we're slowly being drip-fed that information. One thing that I wonder about is the fact that the Mandalorian thus far has been in his mask constantly, whether that is actually becoming a hindrance to character development. And what I mean by that is, when you think about character development, it's not just about exposition and dialogue about the character, or dialogue which gives you a strong sense of who the character is, what motivates them, where they're coming from, their backstory, etc., which there hasn't been a lot of those thus far in this particular show, just as I said, little snippets of it. But also character development comes from what you see on screen, and particular, I think, the facial expressions. When you look into the eyes of a character, the way that they respond to certain scenarios, it tells you a lot about that character, who they are, how they react to various things, whether you see fear, whether you see rage, whatever emotion it is they display. It gives you a sense of what's going on, who this character is in a sort of more complete kind of way. You get a really good read on a person by seeing their face. It's a really important thing. And by looking into the eyes of a person, as the old saying goes, you look into the soul, right? But this guy is wearing a mask and has been for 2 episodes now, so it's actually hard to get a strong read on who the character actually is in a lot of scenarios, because you can't tell, is there fear? Does he feel fear at all? Is he happy? Is he constantly angry? Is he grimacing? It's a little bit hard at times to tell, and particularly little key interactions. I'll give you one example that really stuck out to me, and that was in the first episode where he is having his armor made in the forge, and he has that flashback as the armor is being forged, and he has those little snippets of flashback, which I'm assuming is his childhood. But the thing was, you can't see how he is reacting to those flashbacks. So we know he's having flashbacks. I assume that's not just some random insertion of little backstory moments. They're trying to show us that he was being triggered and experiencing some sort of PTSD-like moment there. But it's hard to tell how he's reacting to that because you can't see his face. So you think about other PTSD that you might see on screen, and what do you see? You see the character who is experiencing that challenging moment, or that difficult sort of psychological moment of trauma. You see their face normally. They might be asleep in a bed, and you see them reacting in a nightmare or a fevered dream type state. Or you see them reacting and wincing or looking around fearfully, or whatever it might be, but you actually see the face in those moments, and it makes a big difference. It sort of connects you with the emotion, with the nature of what is happening for that character, and that was missing because he's wearing a mask, and so it just doesn't quite have the same resonance, and more importantly, this speaks to the lack of character development that I see in this show thus far. Just little snippets of things that I think there's more there that's missing. As I said, I'll talk why that could be in just a second. Secondly, I feel the story development in this show is just a little bit too slow and drawn out. That first episode was slow, but it built up to the point where effectively it was the perfect sort of launch pad at the end of that first episode. And I'm thinking, okay, they're doing a little bit of a slow burn to get us to this point, and then now episode 2 is going to come along, and episode 2 is going to do what it should, and it's going to really launch into the story now. Things are going to actually start happening apace here. Things are going to, I guess, increase. The speed's going to, things are going to ratchet up a little bit. But that's not what happened. Episode 2 is effectively just filler. when you think about that episode, there is only one really important piece of story development that happens in that entire 30 minutes or 29 minutes or so of episode, and that was when Baby Yoda used the Force. That's the most pivotal moment in that story. It's about, 30 seconds to a minute's worth of the actual film in total when you see him doing that. And there is another 27, 28 minutes or so of filler around that, which doesn't develop the story. To me, that's why I'm quite concerned, because especially when you look at what that filler actually was. So that whole second episode, the subplot with the egg was, man, to me that was just so pointless. It just, I thought it was going somewhere, and then we get to the end of it and you think, what was that? So first of all, the whole thing with the egg, it made the Jawas feel like the minions from Despicable Me, and to me, I think that undermined their, what you might call their heritage, their tradition, and the aspect of that character previously is what we've seen it in Star Wars. You know, they were always those quirky sort of scavengers, but they seem to be serious and very industrious in their scavenging and money-making efforts. In this episode 2, they actually feel like idiots, basically. They feel like these weird little minion creatures. And when they were chanting for that egg in particular, I thought, my gosh, this is crazy. Straight away, I thought of the Minions. I thought, am I watching the Minions? And I don't think that's a good reaction to have to a series like this, to think of a character as silly and sort of puerile, the comic relief, effectively, in Despicable Me, a comedic cartoon movie. And I think it didn't sit well with me at all. Secondly, is the fact that whole egg thing was very much, to me, a very strange sort of Deus Ex Machina type device and to use in the plot. Clearly what they wanted a scene where Baby Yoda would use the Force. And so they need a scene, and they need to create a scenario in which the Mandalorian is trapped in some way, and he needs Baby Yoda to use the Force to save him. And so it's this moment of revelation that this little Baby Yoda thing isn't just a Baby Yoda, but it's also Force capable, and that's quite an important moment in the story, and it goes right to the heart of why everyone wants this baby and what's so serious about this, and it sort of amplifies the stakes, basically. And so I understand that's what they needed, but this to me felt like a really sloppy way to achieve that particular plot outcome. The thing I thought of was, why have him go off on his own to hunt for an egg, and also take the baby with him? The first thing that struck me about that whole scene, that whole part of the plot, was, why is Baby Yoda with him? Now, you could argue, okay, well, the Baby Yoda is the bounty and he's not going to let that out of his sight, but he doesn't even really attempt to put the Baby Yoda in a safe place before he goes into that cave. And then he has to actually save the Baby Yoda, which he's left in that difficult situation, or that potentially risky situation. And you're thinking to yourself, why is this going on? Like, this feels like a very forced way to have the Baby Yoda with him, when what they could have done, there's a really simple way to achieve what they want here, and that is, imagine if it had played out like this, that basically once the Jawas had shot him, had tasered him off the top of their transport, and he'd landed on the ground again, then off they'd gone, and he'd woken up. He then wakes up with the baby beside him in the pod, but it's now nighttime, or it's dusk, and night is fast approaching. And so he's got to take cover. And so he's got to find himself some shelter. He takes the baby with him into the nearest network of caves. He does that, and while he's there, he disturbs the creature. The creature comes out and attacks, and the Baby Yoda has to save him using the Force. And to me, that would have made much more sense. It's more organic. It feels like more of what you might call that sort of natural storytelling flow. And most importantly, it makes sense of why Baby Yoda would be there, because he's got no other choice. He can't leave the Baby Yoda with anyone else like he can. He has that option in this current storytelling scenario. So to me, the whole thing just felt so forced. And as I said, that whole second episode, all it really does is it's a lot of filler to get us to that one key storytelling moment where all of a sudden we realize that Baby Yoda is now Force capable. Now, why do I think this sort of stuff is happening? Why is it that the story development feels too slow, the character development feels a little bit undercooked? Well, I think one of the big things going on here, and one of the big problems I think contributing to this, is the fact that the episodes are far too short. The first episode, which is the pilot, was about 40 minutes long. The second episode was only 30 minutes, of which I think about 29 minutes was actual episode when you take away the credits. That's not long at all. And you think about a television series, you normally, particularly something of this caliber, with this sort of anticipation and the budgetary possibilities that they have with this television show, I would have expected 50-minute episodes minimum. That's what I would have thought would have just been the standard. And that extra 20 minutes actually gives you time to do character development. It actually gives you time to flesh out a more full story. And so this is why I'm now worried, because I'm worried that all we're going to see is very short episodes, basically another 6, because as I understand it, there's only 8 episodes in total, right, in this first series. So what we're going to see is little half-an-hour short stories with very little in the way of storytelling substance. We're just going to be drip-fed little moments of the plot to sort of progress to the next point, and we're not going to see much in the way of strong character development. I mean, so far there haven't been many other characters to actually interact with to create that development. I mean, that's certainly part of the issue here, and that might improve in the coming episodes. But I'm a little bit worried that basically that they've got a very thin sort of story concept that they've just split into 8 parts. Basically, this TV series, for it to succeed, it cannot be, I guess a comparison might be Mad Max Fury Road split into 8 parts. It can't be that. And it is kind of like Mad Max Fury Road when you think about it. You've got this guy who is going about his own business. Mad Max is a scavenger rather than a bounty hunter, but you've got this guy who's going about his own business who then gets dragged into someone else's world-saving political battle, and the stakes couldn't be any more real, and he has to sort of, I guess, find a sense of redemption, overcome himself and his own selfishness, and give himself to the cause of goodness, truth, and beauty, and stand for what is, just and right. And so clearly I think that's where this story is heading as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Mad Max Fury Road is basically that one long chase. You go from point A to point B and then back to point A again. And I love Mad Max Fury Road. I think it's a really, really good movie. But one of the reasons it works so well is that it's condensed. You sit down and watch it in one chunk. You don't break Mad Max Fury Road up into, say, 5 or 6 parts and then sit down and watch it. Because if you did that with Mad Max Fury Road, the storytelling intensity would be lost. If you broke that up into parts and watched one part each week, it wouldn't have the same impact and effect. And so this show, I don't think, can be that. If it's going to succeed, it can't be like that. It can't be something like Mad Max Fury Road, this sort of chase from A to B, and a character being pulled into someone else's fight for justice, which is just broken up into 8 parts. It needs to have a lot more substance to it, because basically at the moment, to me, this television show doesn't feel like a properly fleshed out television show. This feels a bit more like little vignettes, like a webisode, basically, like something that's filler that is meant to be complementary to a much bigger piece of content, like a feature film, for example. And what they've done is to pitch the feature film, they've got short story tellers and short filmmakers to make little short films, little vignettes. That's what this TV series feels like. It doesn't feel like a substantial and well fleshed out TV series at the moment. Now, that could change. That could all change, and I think it needs to. Basically, I would suggest that over the next 2 episodes 3 and 4, this really needs to improve dramatically, and then from there it needs to spend the final half of the series actually telling a good story. But I'm a little bit concerned about whether or not that is going to happen based on what we've seen so far. But it does need to improve dramatically, I think, and really episode 3 needs to be a turning point. It can't just be more of the same, otherwise this series is not actually going to be that good. So for me, the jury is out on The Mandalorian. I am not at all sitting here going, yeah, this is awesome, this is amazing, because what I'm looking at here is a little bit troubling. It's a bit worrying that And as I said, the fact that this is what we've seen thus far and the episodes are so short, that worries me. That really worries me. I would have, as I said, I would have thought 50-minute episodes would have been the norm. And the fact that they're not 50-minute episodes kind of worries me that maybe there's not much in the way of story and substance here, and they've just strung it out over 8 episodes. Rather than creating 8 solid hours of television, they've got 4 hours of sort of, thinly stretched television that's just been split into parts. And that's not going to be good storytelling. So far, the storytelling in this is not great. It's okay, and it's setting things up, but it's not great. There's plenty of nostalgia, as I said, but nostalgia is not enough. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because as I'm getting older, I'm a bit more discerning. Life is too short to drink bad whiskey and to eat bad food. I think life is also too short to waste your time on movies, television, film, storytelling, which has no real substance to it. It doesn't improve us in any way. It doesn't draw us into what is good, true, and beautiful. Life is too short to waste on stuff that doesn't do that. And so nostalgia is not enough. You actually need some storytelling substance here. And I think one of the dangers here is that just because this is not as bad as The Last Jedi was, and it is better than The Last Jedi, the tendency or the danger here is we think, oh, this is great, because it's not as bad as that other thing that was really, really awful in the execution of the storytelling. And there's a real danger in that. It's kind of like someone who's been in a formerly abusive relationship where the abuse was really bad, and then they leave that person and they get into a new relationship, and the next person they're in a relationship with is very unkind to them, but they're not as abusive as their former partner was. And so they compare it to what their former partner did to them, and they say, no, this is all good. Trust me, it's all good. Because what they're really meaning is it's not as bad as what it used to be. And I don't think that's enough. I think it is actually perfectly acceptable to expect that a television show with this kind of budget and that is written by professionals should actually tell a good, meaningful, and well-told story that's well executed in the telling as well as the actual substance of the story. That is not unreasonable at all to expect that. You don't expect everything to be a Scorsese-esque masterpiece, but you do expect it to have a little bit more substance than what we've seen so far from The Mandalorian. So for me, the jury is still out. I don't know, I might be back here in a few episodes saying, wow, what was I worried about? This is actually really awesome. It's just completely turned on a dime. It's completely turned on its head. And now it all makes sense. And they were really clever and calculating in the way they set this whole thing up. And it was just amazing. I don't know. I'm open to that possibility. That could be a possibility. I'm not writing the show off by any stretch of the imagination. But I think there are plenty of things to be concerned about here. And it is certainly so far, this is not great storytelling. It is simply what you might call serviceable, and it's doing the job thus far. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, and I'm sure you've got plenty of them about this show, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content that I'm producing, please support me on PayPal. There is a link in the video description below. If that doesn't work for you for some reason for some people it doesn't work, then please go up to my homepage, the main screen on my YouTube channel, and what you will do is you'll find a PayPal button there that you can use, and I know that still works. Please, if you're not a subscriber, get yourself subscribed, and don't forget to hit that notifications button. And please, I know YouTube's sort of been mucking around with subscribers in the last few weeks, so please double check. If you're watching this video and you've been previously subscribed, double check that you are still subscribed, because they've been ditching subscribers off channels, mine included, in their cull, and people have been caught up. Innocent people have been caught up and become part of this collateral damage, who are actually not bots and who are legitimate YouTube users but have been booted off channels. So just check you're still subscribed, and even if you are, make sure you've got that notifications bell turned on. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.